The blood-red sunset painted the dusty main street of Oro Grande, Colorado, as Josephine Calloway clutched her whimpering 3-month-old daughter closer to her chest. Her legs trembled beneath her, weak from 2 days without food, but she forced herself to keep walking. The stagecoach that had dropped her in this remote mining town had long disappeared over the horizon, along with the man who had promised her a life of security, only to abandon her with nothing but a baby and the clothes on her back. The year was 1878, and for a 22-year-old widow with no family and no prospects, the West was an unforgiving place. Josephine had married Thomas Burroughs at 19, following him west from Boston with dreams of adventure and prosperity. When he died of typhoid fever 6 months into her pregnancy, she'd written to her cousin in Denver, who had arranged for his business associate to escort her there. That associate had robbed her of what little money she had left, abandoning her and the baby in this unfamiliar town. "Hush now, Emily," she whispered, her voice cracking with thirst. "We'll find help. We must." The baby's cries grew louder, drawing curious and judgmental stares from the few townsfolk still on the streets as evening approached. Josephine felt her face burn with shame. She had never begged before, but her daughter's hunger left her no choice. She approached the general store, but the proprietor, a stern-faced woman with steel-gray hair, took one look at her threadbare dress and the crying infant and shook her head before Josephine could even speak. "We don't give handouts," the woman said sharply. "Move along before you scare away paying customers." Tears pricked Josephine's eyes, but she blinked them back. Crying would solve nothing. She turned away, moving down the street toward the saloon, though she knew a respectable woman would never enter such an establishment. But respectability wouldn't feed her baby. As she hesitated outside the swinging doors, a deep voice called out from behind her. "Madam, excuse me, madam." Josephine turned to see a tall man dismounting from a chestnut stallion. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see he was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble. Unlike the other men she'd seen in town, his clothes were clean though well-worn. A simple cotton shirt, leather vest, and denim trousers tucked into dusty boots. "Yes," she replied warily, instinctively pulling Emily closer. "Forgive me for intruding, but I couldn't help noticing." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You look like you might need some assistance." "We're fine," she said automatically, pride momentarily overriding hunger. At that moment, Emily's cries grew more insistent, and Josephine felt her own stomach twist painfully with hunger. The man's eyes, a striking hazel color, moved to the baby, then back to Josephine's face. "My name is Yates Rutherford," he said, removing his hat to reveal thick, dark hair. "I have a ranch about 3 miles outside of town. I was just finishing up some business here and heading home." He cleared his throat. "I'm not in the habit of approaching ladies on the street," but his eyes took in her thin face and trembling hands. "When was the last time you ate, madam?" Josephine swallowed hard. "Yesterday morning," she admitted softly, "but I'm looking for work." "I can cook clean," so Yates shook his head, cutting her off. "First things first." His voice was gentle but firm. "You'll eat at my table tonight, both of you," he gestured toward Emily. "Then we can discuss whatever else needs discussing." Josephine hesitated. Her mother had warned her never to trust strange men, especially in the wild territories. But her baby was hungry, and this man's eyes held no malice, only concern. "I don't accept charity," she said finally. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Then consider it an advance on whatever work we agree upon." He replaced his hat. "I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy. She's been with my family for years. You'll be perfectly proper under her watchful eye." Relief washed over Josephine so intensely she felt light-headed. "Thank you, Mr. Rutherford." "Yates," he corrected, then gestured toward his horse. "Can you ride? It's not far, but walking wouldn't be advisable." "I can," she confirmed. In truth, she had only ridden a few times in her life, but desperation made her bold. Yates helped her mount the stallion, carefully handing Emily back to her once she was settled in the saddle. Then he took the reins and began leading the horse down the main street and out of town. "We'll get you both fed soon enough," he said, glancing up at her. "And Mrs. Abernathy might have some things for the little one." As they left Oro Grande behind them, Josephine allowed herself the tiniest spark of hope. Perhaps this wasn't the end of her journey, but the beginning of something new. The ranch appeared as they crested a gentle hill, a sturdy two-story house surrounded by several outbuildings, a corral and rolling pastures stretching toward distant mountains. The land was greener than Josephine had expected, with a creek visible in the distance. "It's beautiful," she murmured, genuinely impressed. "It's home," Yates replied simply, a note of pride in his voice. "My father built it 20 years ago when this was still mostly wilderness, passed it to me when he died 3 years back." As they approached, Josephine could see the house was well maintained, with a wide porch and curtains visible in the windows. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth inside. A stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her expression shifted from curiosity to concern as they drew closer. "Yates Rutherford, who have you brought home?" she called, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Someone who needs our help, Mrs. Abernathy," he called back, leading the horse to the hitching post. "This is Miss," he paused, looking up at Josephine. "Mrs. Josephine Calloway," she supplied. "And my daughter, Emily." Yates helped her down from the horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment, Josephine felt a strange flutter in her chest as their eyes met, but she quickly attributed it to hunger and exhaustion. Mrs. Abernathy approached, her shrewd eyes taking in Josephine's worn dress and the bundle in her arms. "Lord have mercy," she murmured. "Your half-starved child." She shot Yates a look. "Well, don't just stand there, bring them inside. I've got stew on the stove and biscuits in the oven." The housekeeper led the way, continuing to speak over her shoulder. "And that baby needs milk. We've got fresh from the cow this morning. How old is she?" 3 months, Josephine replied, following Mrs. Abernathy up the porch steps, aware of Yates close behind her. Inside, the house was warm and inviting, far more comfortable than Josephine had expected for a bachelor's ranch. The furniture was solid and well-crafted, the floors covered with braided rugs. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of cooking food made Josephine's stomach clench painfully. "Sit, sit," Mrs. Abernathy insisted, gesturing to the kitchen table. "Let me see that little one while you eat." Josephine hesitated, reluctant to relinquish her daughter even for a moment. "Mrs. Abernathy raised me and my brothers after our mother died," Yates said quietly, seeming to understand her concern. "There's no one better with children." Cautiously, Josephine handed Emily to the older woman who cradled her with practiced ease. "Beautiful baby," Mrs. Abernathy declared, peering into Emily's tiny face. "Got her mama's eyes, I see. Now you sit and eat, Mrs. Calloway. I'll tend to this little miss." Within minutes, Josephine found herself before a steaming bowl of beef and vegetable stew, fresh biscuits, and a glass of milk. She tried to eat slowly and with decorum, but hunger overrode manners, and she devoured the meal with embarrassing speed. Yates sat across from her, sipping coffee, his eyes occasionally drifting to where Mrs. Abernathy sat in a rocking chair, feeding Emily from a small bottle. "How did you come to be alone in Oro Grande?" he asked when Josephine had slowed her eating. She hesitated, then decided honesty was her only option. Briefly, she explained her circumstances, her husband's death, her hopes of reaching her cousin in Denver, and the betrayal that had left her stranded. "You have the man's name?" Yates asked, his voice hardening. "The one who abandoned you." "He called himself James Miller, but I suspect that wasn't his real name." Yates nodded thoughtfully. "There are too many like him out here, preying on the vulnerable. I'm not usually so foolish," Josephine said, feeling defensive, "but with the baby coming and no money for a proper escort." "You don't need to explain," he said gently. "The West makes gamblers of us all." He paused. "Your cousin in Denver, can you still reach her?" Josephine shook her head. "The address she gave me doesn't exist. I learned that from the stagecoach driver. I suspect she may have moved on." In truth, her cousin Beatrice had always been flighty, disappearing for months at a time, which was why Josephine hadn't been completely shocked when the driver told her the address was fictitious. "So you have nowhere to go," Yates concluded. "I'll find work," Josephine said firmly. "I'm not afraid of hard labor, Mr. Rutherford." "Yates," he corrected again with a slight smile, And as it happens, I do need help around the ranch." He glanced at Mrs. Abernathy. "Our previous kitchen helper left last month to get married, and Mrs. Abernathy has been managing alone." "It's too much for these old bones," the housekeeper confirmed, still rocking Emily, who had fallen asleep after her meal. "Cooking for the ranch hands during roundup nearly did me in." "I'm an excellent cook," Josephine said eagerly, "and I can clean, mend, do laundry, whatever's needed." Yates studied her for a moment. "The work is hard, the days are long, and the pay is modest room and board for you and your daughter, plus $10 a month." It was less than she might earn elsewhere, but the offer included a roof over their heads and food in their bellies. "I accept," Josephine said without hesitation. "Good," Yates said with a nod. "Mrs. Abernathy will show you to your room. You'll start tomorrow after you've had proper rest." "Thank you," Josephine said, emotion threatening to overcome her. "I won't let you down." Yates stood, his tall frame imposing in the warm kitchen light. "I should check on the horses. Mrs. Abernathy, please see that Mrs. Calloway and her daughter have everything they need." After he left, Mrs. Abernathy gave Josephine a penetrating look. "He's a good man, our Yates, not like most. His father raised him right." She handed Emily back to Josephine. "Come along, you'll stay in the small room off the kitchen. It's where I used to sleep before my joints got too bad and Mr. Rutherford moved me to the downstairs bedroom." The room was indeed small but clean and comfortable, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the kitchen garden. Mrs. Abernathy brought a wooden crate lined with soft blankets for Emily to sleep in. "It's not fancy, but it'll keep her safe until we can arrange something better," the housekeeper said. "There's a washroom down the hall, clean towels in the chest." She paused at the door. "The men take breakfast at sunrise. You'll need to be up an hour before to help me prepare it." Josephine nodded. "I'll be ready." After Mrs. Abernathy left, Josephine settled Emily in her makeshift bed, then sat on the edge of her own, overwhelmed by the day's events. Hours ago, she had been contemplating which alley might provide shelter for the night. Now she had a job, a room, and food for her daughter. As exhaustion overtook her, her last thoughts were of Yates Rutherford's kind hazel eyes and the unexpected mercy she had found in this harsh land. The rooster's crow woke Josephine well before dawn. For a moment, she lay disoriented in the unfamiliar bed before remembering where she was and what had transpired the previous day. Emily was still sleeping peacefully in her crate-turned cradle, so Josephine took advantage of the quiet to wash and dress in the simple gray dress Mrs. Abernathy had left for her slightly too large but clean and whole. When she entered the kitchen, the housekeeper was already there, stoking the stove fire. "Good morning," Josephine said softly. Mindful of the early hour, Mrs. Abernathy turned, her expression approving. "You're prompt." "That's good." She nodded toward a large bowl on the table. "Biscuit dough needs kneading. After that, you can start the bacon. We feed 8 men breakfast, including Yates and the foreman, Luke Daniels." Josephine set to work immediately, grateful for familiar tasks that required no instruction. By the time Emily woke, fussing softly, the kitchen was filled with the smell of frying bacon, fresh biscuits, and coffee. "Go tend to your little one," Mrs. Abernathy said, waving Josephine away from the stove. "Bring her out here when you're done. The men will be in soon." After changing and feeding Emily, Josephine returned to the kitchen just as the door opened and men began filing in trail-worn cowboys with weather-beaten faces and calloused hands. They paused at the sight of her, removing hats and nodding respectfully. "Mrs. Calloway will be helping in the kitchen," Mrs. Abernathy announced. "And this is her daughter, Emily." The men murmured greetings, clearly curious but too hungry or too polite to ask questions. Last through the door was Yates, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt despite the early hour. "Good morning, Mrs. Calloway," he said, his eyes moving briefly to Emily in her arms. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you," she replied, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "Sit down, all of you," Mrs. Abernathy commanded. "Food's getting cold." The meal proceeded with little conversation beyond requests to pass dishes. Josephine remained standing, helping Mrs. Abernathy serve while balancing Emily in one arm. When the men had eaten their fill and departed for their morning chores, Yates lingered at the table. "You and Mrs. Abernathy should eat now, he said, reaching for his hat. Then she can show you the routine. He hesitated, then added, I've asked Luke to build a proper cradle for Emily. He's good with woodwork, should be ready in a day or two. That's very kind, Josephine said, touched by his thoughtfulness. Not at all. He settled his hat on his head. I'll be back for dinner. There's a herd to move to the north pasture today. After he left, Mrs. Abernathy poured coffee for both of them. That man, she said with a knowing look, always thinking of others before himself, just like his father. He seems very generous, Josephine agreed, sitting down with Emily in her lap. Generous, yes, but not foolish. Mrs. Abernathy buttered a biscuit. He took one look at you yesterday and saw a hard worker, not just someone to pity. Yates Rutherford doesn't keep people on charity, he expects honest work for honest pay. Josephine straightened her spine. Then he'll get it from me. The housekeeper's weathered face softened into a smile. I believe he will. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and routine. Josephine rose before dawn each day to help prepare breakfast, then spent her mornings cleaning the house, doing laundry, or helping in the garden. Afternoons were for baking bread and preparing the evening meal. Throughout it all, Emily was either strapped to her chest in a sling Mrs. Abernathy had fashioned or napping in the beautiful pine cradle Luke had indeed built, with delicate carvings of flowers around its edges. True to his word, Yates was a fair employer. He never commented when Josephine needed to pause her work to tend to Emily, and he ensured she had one afternoon each week to rest or see to personal matters. Though their interactions were limited to mealtimes and brief encounters around the ranch, Josephine found herself increasingly aware of his presence, the sound of his voice as he gave instructions to the ranch hands, the scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to him, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. It was foolish, she told herself firmly. She was a widow with a child, dependent on his employment. Whatever fleeting attraction she might feel was inappropriate and impractical. Besides, a man like Yates Rutherford, handsome, respected, and prosperous, could have his pick of women in the territory. He certainly wouldn't be interested in her. Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Josephine was hanging laundry in the yard, Emily sleeping peacefully in her cradle nearby, when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Yates riding toward the house, accompanied by a woman on a Palomino mare. Even from a distance, Josephine could see the woman was beautiful blonde hair gleaming in the sunlight, her riding habit clearly expensive and fashionable. As they drew closer, the woman's laughter carried on the breeze, and Josephine felt an unexpected stab of jealousy. She quickly busied herself with the sheets, determined not to be caught staring. Mrs. Calloway, Yates called as they reached the yard. Good afternoon. Mr. Rutherford, she acknowledged, glancing up briefly. Would you and your guest like refreshments? That would be very kind, he replied, dismounting and turning to help the blonde woman down from her horse. This is Miss Victoria Hargrove. Her father owns the mercantile in town. Victoria Hargrove was even more beautiful up close, porcelain skin, cornflower blue eyes, and a confident smile that spoke of wealth and privilege. So you're the new kitchen help, Miss Hargrove said, her tone not unkind but assessing. Father mentioned Yates had taken in a widow and her baby. How charitable of him. Josephine felt her cheeks flush. Mr. Rutherford gave me employment, not charity, she corrected politely. If you'll excuse me, I'll fetch some lemonade. She hurried inside, embarrassed by her threadbare dress and wind-blown hair compared to Miss Hargrove's polished appearance. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Abernathy slicing bread. The Hargrove girl is here, Josephine said, trying to keep her voice neutral as she poured lemonade. With Mr. Rutherford, Mrs. Abernathy made a sound that might have been a snort. That one's been setting her cap for him since she was 16. Her father's the richest man in the county, and she thinks that makes her entitled to the best ranch as well. They seem well suited, Josephine said carefully, arranging glasses on a tray. HMPH, Yates is too smart to be taken in by a pretty face and her father's money. Mrs. Abernathy added a plate of cookies to the tray, though Harold Hargrove has been pushing for a match. Would consolidate quite a bit of power in the county. Josephine returned outside to find Yates and Victoria seated on the porch, their heads bent close in conversation. At her approach, Yates looked up, his expression brightening. "Ah, thank you, Mrs. Calloway," he said, standing to take the tray from her. Victoria's eyes moved from Yates to Josephine, narrowing slightly before her smile returned. "How delightful. I was just telling Yates that Father's hosting a harvest dance next Saturday. The whole county will be there." "It sounds wonderful," Josephine replied, taking a step back. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on Emily." "Your baby is welcome to come inside with you while you work," Yates said, glancing toward the cradle. "It's getting warm out here." "Thank you," Josephine murmured, retrieving Emily and heading inside, acutely aware of Victoria's calculating gaze following her. Later that evening, after the men had eaten and Josephine was washing dishes, Yates appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mrs. Calloway, might I have a word?" he asked. Josephine dried her hands on her apron. "Of course, Mr. Rutherford." He led her to his study, a room she had cleaned but never occupied when he was present. It was distinctly masculine, with leather-bound books lining the walls and a large oak desk dominating the space. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to a chair before perching on the edge of his desk. Josephine sat, her hands folded in her lap. "Is there a problem with my work?" "Not at all," he assured her quickly. "Quite the contrary. Mrs. Abernathy says you've been invaluable." He cleared his throat. "I wanted to speak to you about the harvest dance Miss Hargrove mentioned." "Oh," Josephine's heart sank. Was he going to ask for time off to court Victoria properly? "I would like you to attend," he said, surprising her completely. "With me?" Josephine stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon." Yates ran a hand through his hair, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "I should explain. Harold Hargrove has been pressuring me to court his daughter for the past year. He controls the bank and most of the businesses in town. Having him as an ally would be advantageous." "I see," Josephine said, her voice small. "And you want me to attend to care for Emily while you court Miss Hargrove?" "What? No," Yates said, looking genuinely confused. "I'm explaining why I have not pursued Victoria despite the obvious advantages. The truth is, I have no interest in a marriage of convenience." His eyes met hers directly. "I'm asking you to attend the dance with me, Mrs. Calloway, as my guest, not my employee." Josephine's pulse quickened. "But what would people say?" "A widow with a baby and no connections. I don't give a damn what people say," Yates interrupted, his voice firm. "Forgive my language, but I've spent the last 3 weeks observing your grace under pressure, your dedication to your daughter, your willingness to work without complaint." He took a deep breath. "I find myself thinking of you far more than is appropriate for an employer." Josephine felt warmth spreading through her chest. "Mr. Rutherford Yates," he corrected gently. "Please?" "Yates," she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. "Are you certain?" "Victoria Hargrove is beautiful, well-connected, and entirely wrong for me," he finished. "I'm not asking for any commitment, Josephine, just one evening, a chance to know each other away from the duties of the ranch." He smiled slightly. "And perhaps to show Harold Hargrove that his daughter's affections might be better directed elsewhere." Despite herself, Josephine laughed. "You're using me to discourage a persistent suitor's father?" His expression grew serious. "No. I'm asking a woman I've grown to admire greatly to accompany me to a social event. The fact that it might also resolve an awkward situation is merely a fortunate coincidence." Josephine considered his words. It was foolish, perhaps even reckless, to encourage whatever attraction was growing between them. Yet the thought of attending the dance on Yates's arm made her heart leap with a joy she hadn't felt since before Thomas's death. "I have nothing suitable to wear," she said finally. Yates's smile returned, broader this time. "Is that a yes?" "It's a practical concern," she countered, but couldn't suppress her own smile. "Then it's easily addressed." He stood. "Mrs. Abernathy can accompany you to town tomorrow. There's a dressmaker who can work quickly. Consider it an advance on your wages." "That's very generous." "Not at all." His eyes held hers. "I'll look forward to Saturday evening then." As Josephine returned to the kitchen, her mind whirling with the unexpected turn of events, she found Mrs. Abernathy waiting with a knowing expression. "So he finally worked up the courage to ask you," the housekeeper said. Josephine gaped at her. "You knew?" Mrs. Abernathy's eyes twinkled. "Child, I've known that boy since he was in short pants. I know when he's sweet on someone." She patted Josephine's hand. "And it's about time, too." He's been alone too long since his father passed. It's just a dance, Josephine protested weakly. Hum. Mrs. Abernathy was clearly unconvinced. And I suppose that's why he's been finding excuses to come to the house for meals when he usually eats with the men during roundup. Why he built that garden bench facing your window. Why he asks after you and Emily first thing every morning. Josephine's face warmed. Has he really? Lord, give me strength, Mrs. Abernathy muttered. You're both as blind as newborn kittens. She shooed Josephine toward the stairs. Go get some rest. We'll head to town after breakfast tomorrow. If you're going to turn every head at that dance, including that stubborn man's, you'll need a proper dress. Saturday evening arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze, perfect weather for the outdoor portion of the harvest dance. Mrs. Abernathy had outdone herself, helping Josephine prepare with the enthusiasm of a mother dressing her daughter for her first ball. The dress they had commissioned was far more elegant than anything Josephine had owned even before her husband's death, a deep burgundy silk with delicate lace trim at the modest neckline and cuffs. The dressmaker had worked miracles, completing it in just 3 days and even providing a matching ribbon for Josephine's hair, which Mrs. Abernathy had arranged in a simple but flattering upswept style. You look beautiful, the housekeeper declared, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Like you belong in one of those fancy Boston parlors. Thank you, Josephine whispered, hardly recognizing her reflection in the small mirror. Months of hard work had added healthy color to her cheeks, and the dress's rich color made her eyes seem more intensely blue. Now I'll watch Emily, Mrs. Abernathy continued, picking up the baby from where she lay on Josephine's bed. Don't you worry about a thing, just enjoy yourself for once. A knock at the door announced Yates's arrival. Josephine took a deep breath and went to meet him. He was waiting at the foot of the stairs, dressed in what was clearly his finest, a black suit with a crisp white shirt and string tie. His hair was neatly combed and his boots polished to a high shine. When he looked up and saw her descending, his expression made all the preparation worthwhile. Josephine, he breathed, using her given name for the first time. You look extraordinary. Thank you, she replied, suddenly shy. You're quite handsome yourself. He offered his arm. Shall we? The Hargrove property was on the outskirts of Oro Grande, a sprawling estate that showcased the family's wealth. Lanterns had been strung across the expansive garden, a wooden dance floor constructed beneath a canopy of elm trees, and tables laden with food and drink positioned around the perimeter. As their wagon approached, Josephine felt her nervousness return. Everyone is staring, she murmured. Let them, Yates replied, his hand covering hers reassuringly. You're the loveliest woman here. He helped her down from the wagon with careful hands, then offered his arm again as they walked toward the gathering. Josephine was acutely aware of curious eyes following their progress, some merely interested, others openly disapproving. Victoria Hargrove stood with her father near the entrance to the garden, greeting guests. Her smile froze when she saw Josephine on Yates's arm. Mr. Rutherford, she said, her voice tight. How lovely that you could attend. Her gaze swept dismissively over Josephine. And you've brought your housekeeper. Mrs. Calloway is my guest this evening, Yates corrected, his tone pleasant but firm. Harold Hargrove, a portly man with shrewd eyes, assessed the situation quickly. How unexpected, he said, his voice neutral. Please enjoy yourselves. He guided his daughter away before she could respond further, though the look Victoria cast over her shoulder was venomous. I'm sorry, Josephine whispered as Yates led her toward the refreshment table. I've embarrassed you. Nonsense, he replied. Victoria's pride is wounded, nothing more. And her father is too much of a businessman to make a scene. He squeezed her hand. Now shall we dance? I believe the musicians are starting. The local string quartet had begun a waltz and couples were moving onto the dance floor. Josephine hesitated. It's been a long time since I danced. I'll lead, Yates promised, guiding her into position. Just follow me. His hand was warm at her waist, his other holding hers firmly as they began to move. Josephine was stiff at first, too conscious of the watching crowd, but gradually relaxed as Yates guided her confidently around the floor. See, you're a natural, he murmured. Josephine laughed softly. Hardly, but you make it easy to follow. As they danced, she became aware of a growing sense of rightness in his arms. The tension that had been her constant companion since Thomas's death seemed to ebb away, replaced by a warm contentment she had thought lost forever. The evening passed in a blur of dances, conversations with curious townspeople, and moments of quiet connection with Yates. By the time the moon was high overhead, Josephine had nearly forgotten the awkward beginning with Victoria. They were standing near the garden's edge, Yates telling her a story about his first cattle drive, when Victoria appeared before them, her eyes unnaturally bright. "Yates," she said, ignoring Josephine entirely, "Father asked me to remind you about the business proposal he mentioned. He'd like to discuss it with you." She placed a possessive hand on his arm. "Privately." "Another time, perhaps," Yates replied smoothly, stepping back so her hand fell away. "I'm enjoying the evening with Mrs. Calloway." Victoria's composure slipped. "With your kitchen help. Really, Yates, I understood you were being charitable by employing her, but this is beyond the pale. What would your father think, seeing you throw away an advantageous connection for this?" She gestured dismissively at Josephine. Before Yates could respond, Josephine straightened her spine. "Miss Hargrove, I understand your disappointment, but it doesn't excuse rudeness. Mr. Rutherford has been kind enough to invite me this evening, and I'm grateful for his company." "Now, if you'll excuse us, kind," Victoria laughed, the sound brittle. "Is that what you think this is, kindness? Oh, you poor, naive woman, men like Yates don't marry women like you. They may dally with them, even install them in their homes under respectable pretenses, but they marry women of their own class." She smiled coldly. "Enjoy your dance, Mrs. Calloway, but don't mistake it for anything more than a momentary diversion." She swept away, leaving Josephine shaken despite her outward composure. "Josephine," Yates began, his expression troubled. "You know that's not, it's all right," she interrupted, forcing a smile. "She's upset, and people say things they don't mean when they're hurt." She glanced around at the curious onlookers who had witnessed the exchange. "Perhaps we should leave. I'm concerned about Emily." Yates studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Of course." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, the easy companionship of earlier replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Victoria's words echoed in Josephine's mind, awakening doubts she had tried to suppress. What was she doing, allowing herself to develop feelings for a man so far above her station? A widow with a baby and no prospects had no business dreaming of a future with someone like Yates Rutherford. It had been foolish to imagine, even for one evening, that they could bridge the gap between their worlds. When they reached the ranch, Yates helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "Josephine, about what Victoria said, please," she interrupted, stepping back. "It's late and I should check on Emily. Thank you for a lovely evening, Mr. Rutherford." "We're back to Mr. Rutherford now?" he asked quietly. Josephine couldn't meet his eyes. "It's more appropriate, don't you think, for an employer and employee?" Without waiting for his response, she hurried inside, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the magical evening had ended, and with it, the brief fantasy that she might find happiness again. The following days brought a strained politeness between Josephine and Yates. She performed her duties with the same diligence as before, but deliberately avoided being alone with him, ensuring that Mrs. Abernathy or one of the ranch hands was always present during their interactions. For his part, Yates seemed to respect her unspoken request for distance, though she occasionally caught him watching her with an expression of frustration and concern. It was better this way, Josephine told herself firmly. Better to maintain professional boundaries than to risk her heart and possibly her livelihood on a relationship that could never work. 2 weeks after the dance, a late summer thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains. By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened to an ominous gray-green, and Josephine hurried to bring in the laundry before the rain began. She was just collecting the last of the sheets when she heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Looking up, she saw Yates riding hard toward the house, his expression grim. "Get inside," he called as soon as he was within earshot. "Storm's going to be bad. Where's Emily?" "With Mrs. Abernathy in the kitchen," Josephine replied, gathering the sheets in her arms. Yates dismounted in one fluid motion. Take those in and stay there. I need to secure the livestock. The urgency in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. As he turned to head toward the barn, Josephine impulsively caught his arm. Be careful, she said softly. His expression softened momentarily. I will. Inside, the house was already being prepared for the storm. Mrs. Abernathy was lighting lamps, though it was barely 3 in the afternoon, and Emily was sleeping in her cradle in the kitchen. Yates went to secure the livestock, Josephine reported, setting the laundry basket aside. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. Smart man. This one's going to be fierce. You can feel it in the air. She glanced out the window. Luke and the boys are bringing in the horses. Best get some water boiling for coffee. They'll be soaked through when they're done. Josephine busied herself with preparations, trying not to worry about Yates and the ranch hands out in the worsening weather. The wind had picked up, howling around the eaves of the house, and the first fat drops of rain began to strike the windows. By the time the men returned, the storm was in full force. Yates was the last through the door, his clothes plastered to his body and water streaming from his hat. Everything's secured, he reported, removing his dripping coat. But that creek's rising fast, might flood the lower pasture. Here, Josephine said, handing him a towel, you'll catch your death. Their fingers brushed as he took it, and for a moment their eyes met. Something flickered in his gaze, a warmth that made her pulse quicken despite her resolution to maintain distance. Thank you, he murmured. The storm intensified as evening approached. Rain lashed the windows, and lightning illuminated the sky in brilliant flashes, followed by thunder that shook the very foundations of the house. Dinner was a subdued affair, with the men eating quickly before retiring to the bunkhouse, leaving only Yates, Josephine, Mrs. Abernathy, and Emily in the main house. I'll check the windows upstairs, Yates said as Josephine cleared the table. Make sure nothing's leaking. He had just reached the stairs when a particularly violent gust of wind shrieked around the house, followed by a tremendous crash from the direction of the kitchen. Josephine gasped as the house plunged into darkness, the lamps extinguished by the sudden draft. Stay where you are, Yates called, his voice steady in the darkness. I'll get a lantern. Josephine heard him moving with surprising sureness, then the scratch of a match and the welcome glow of a lantern. In its light, she could see that a large tree branch had smashed through the kitchen window, sending glass and debris across the floor. Emily, she cried, rushing toward the cradle that had been positioned, thank God, on the far side of the room. She's all right, Mrs. Abernathy assured her, already at the baby's side. Not a scratch on her, though she's certainly letting us know she's displeased about being awakened. Yates was examining the broken window, his expression concerned. We can't leave it like this. The rain's already coming in. He glanced around the kitchen. We need to move to the parlor, away from this side of the house. I'll board up the window as best I can, then join you. Josephine lifted Emily from her cradle, soothing her cries. Let me help you first. No, Yates said firmly. Take Emily and go with Mrs. Abernathy. There's glass everywhere. Reluctantly, Josephine complied, following Mrs. Abernathy to the parlor. The older woman built up the fire while Josephine settled Emily, who had calmed somewhat but still whimpered occasionally as thunder continued to shake the house. That man, Mrs. Abernathy muttered, glancing toward the kitchen where they could hear Yates working. Stubborn as a mule. He's just being practical, Josephine said, though she couldn't help worrying about him dealing with broken glass in near darkness. Practical would be letting you help, Mrs. Abernathy gave her a knowing look. But he's protecting you, same as he's been trying to do since you arrived. I don't need protection, Josephine protested. I've been taking care of myself and Emily just fine. Have you now? The housekeeper raised an eyebrow, and before you came here. When you were alone in town with no food and nowhere to go, she shook her head. There's no shame in accepting help, child, especially from someone who offers it freely with no expectation of repayment. Before Josephine could respond, Yates appeared in the doorway, his shirt sleeves rolled up and a small cut visible on his forearm. You're hurt, she said, rising immediately. It's nothing, he dismissed. Just a scratch. Windows secured for now. I nailed some boards across it. We'll have to replace the glass when the storm passes. Mrs. Abernathy took Emily from Josephine. Let me hold this little one while you tend to that cut. Don't want it getting infected." Despite Yates's protests that the injury was minor, Josephine insisted on cleaning and bandaging it properly. She worked in silence, acutely aware of his gaze on her face as she dabbed at the cut with a cloth soaked in witch hazel. "You've been avoiding me," he said quietly, when Mrs. Abernathy had moved to the far side of the room, humming softly to Emily. Josephine kept her eyes on her work. "I've been busy. Josephine," his voice was gentle but insistent. "Look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "What Victoria said at the dance, you didn't believe her, did you?" he asked. "It doesn't matter what I believed," Josephine replied, beginning to wrap a clean bandage around his arm. "She was right about one thing. There are expectations for men in your position. Marrying your housekeeper isn't among them. Marrying." Yates repeated, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Is that what we're discussing now?" Josephine felt her face warm. "I didn't mean that is, I was speaking hypothetically, because if we are," he continued as if she hadn't spoken, "I should point out that my father married his housekeeper." At her startled look, he nodded. "Mrs. Abernathy's sister, to be precise, after my mother died. Caused quite the scandal in town, but they were happy for 15 years until her death." I didn't know," Josephine stammered. "No reason you would." Yates placed his hand over hers where it rested on his bandaged arm. "My point is, I've never much cared what people in town think about my choices. I care about what makes me happy." His eyes held hers. "And these past few weeks, what would have made me happiest is spending more time with you and Emily, not less." Josephine's heart beat faster. "It's too soon," she whispered. "Thomas has only been gone a year and you barely know me." "I know enough," Yates said firmly. "I know you're strong, resilient, devoted to your daughter. I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met, never complaining even when you're exhausted. I know you make this house feel more like a home than it has in years." He paused, his expression softening. "And I know that when I saw you standing in the street with Emily that day, something told me my life was about to change." A crash of thunder punctuated his words, making Josephine jump. Yates's hand tightened reassuringly over hers. "I'm not asking for promises," he continued. "Just a chance to court you properly, to see if what I feel, what I hope you might feel too, can grow into something lasting." Josephine found herself trembling, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that she wanted exactly what he was offering. Despite her attempts to guard her heart, she had fallen for this kind, strong man who had taken in a desperate widow and her child without hesitation. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "When Thomas died, I thought I'd never find happiness again. Then you came along, and suddenly I could imagine a future that wasn't just about survival." She looked down at their joined hands. "What if I lose that again?" "Life offers no guarantees," Yates acknowledged. "But isn't the possibility of happiness worth the risk?" Before she could answer, Emily began to cry in earnest, startled by another peal of thunder. Mrs. Abernathy brought her over, and Josephine automatically reached for her daughter, cradling her close. "There now, little one," she murmured. "It's just noise. You're safe." To her surprise, Yates leaned forward and gently stroked Emily's cheek with one finger. "You're both safe here," he said, his voice low and certain. "Always." Emily's cries subsided as she gazed up at him with wide, curious eyes. Josephine watched as the baby's tiny hand closed around Yates's finger, and something shifted inside her, a final barrier giving way. "Yes," she said suddenly, causing both Yates and Mrs. Abernathy to look at her in surprise. "Yes," Yates repeated, hope lighting his features. "Yes, I'll allow you to court me," Josephine clarified, a smile spreading across her face despite her best efforts to remain composed. "Although it seems rather formal, considering we already live under the same roof." Yates's answering smile was brilliant. "I'll court you so properly the town gossips won't know what to make of it." He glanced at Mrs. Abernathy. "With a respectable chaperone, of course." The housekeeper snorted. "As if I haven't been watching you two dance around each other for weeks already." She waved her hand dismissively. "Go on, then. Consider yourselves chaperoned. I'm going to make some tea before this storm blows us all to Kansas." As Mrs. Abernathy bustled out, muttering about young people and their complications, Yates moved to sit beside Josephine on the sofa, his arm sliding naturally around her shoulders. Emily, now calm, blinked sleepily between them. "She likes you," Josephine observed as the baby continued to hold Yates's finger. "The feeling is mutual," he replied softly. "She's extraordinary, like her mother." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within the warm circle of Yates's arm, with Emily nestled against her chest, Josephine felt only peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, the family she had never expected to find in the wild lands of Colorado. The weeks following the storm marked a subtle but significant shift in life at the Rutherford Ranch. Yates was true to his word, courting Josephine with a gentle persistence that both amused and touched her. There were wildflowers on the breakfast table some mornings, rides together on his gentlest mare in the evenings, and quiet conversations by the fire after Emily had been put to bed. News of their courtship spread quickly through Oro Grande, prompting mixed reactions. Some, like Sheriff Dawson and his wife, offered warm congratulations when Yates escorted Josephine to church on Sundays. Others, particularly those in Victoria Hargrove's social circle, were less welcoming, exchanging whispers behind gloved hands. Harold Hargrove, surprisingly, seemed to harbor no ill will. When Josephine encountered him at the general store one afternoon, he tipped his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Calloway," he acknowledged. "I trust you're well." "Very well, thank you, Mr. Hargrove," she replied cautiously. He studied her for a moment. "You know, I've known Yates Rutherford since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Stubborn as they come, that one, always does exactly as he pleases." His expression softened slightly, but he's a good judge of character, always has been. Josephine wasn't entirely sure how to respond to this oblique approval. "Your daughter is a lovely young woman," she offered diplomatically. "Any man would be fortunate to win her affections." "Indeed," Hargrove agreed with a shrewd smile. "And I suspect Mr. Ellis from Denver might be that fortunate man. His family owns 3 banks and a railroad." He tipped his hat again. "Good day, Mrs. Calloway." As September gave way to October, the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, and the ranch's pace changed with the approach of winter. The final cattle drive of the season returned, bringing with it a boisterous celebration as the cowboys prepared to collect their wages and either winter at the ranch or move on to other work. The evening of the roundup feast found Josephine in the kitchen with Mrs. Abernathy, preparing enough food to satisfy 20 hungry men. Emily sat in her high chair, happily gumming a wooden spoon while the 2 women worked in companionable rhythm. "Yates says Luke's staying on as foreman through the winter," Mrs. Abernathy commented as she kneaded bread dough. "And most of the boys, too. Ranch is doing well. I'm glad," Josephine replied, slicing apples for pies. "They're good men." Mrs. Abernathy gave her a sidelong glance. "Yates took you out riding yesterday afternoon, came back looking mighty pleased with himself." Josephine felt her cheeks warm at the memory. They had ridden to a beautiful overlook where the valley spread out below them, ablaze with autumn colors. There, Yates had spread a blanket and produced a simple picnic, and they had talked for hours about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their hopes for the future. And then, as the sun began to set, he had taken her hand and asked, very formally, if she would consider becoming his wife. He proposed, Josephine admitted quietly, unable to suppress her smile. "I said yes." Mrs. Abernathy let out a whoop that startled Emily into dropping her spoon. "Well, it's about time. When's the wedding to be?" "Christmas," Josephine replied, retrieving the spoon and wiping it clean before returning it to Emily. "A small ceremony here at the ranch, just family and close friends." She glanced at the housekeeper. "I was hoping you might help me make a dress." "Nothing fancy, but nothing fancy," Mrs. Abernathy scoffed. "Child, you're marrying one of the most prosperous ranchers in the county. You'll have a proper wedding gown if I have to sew it with my own 2 hands. Her expression softened, "Which I will, and gladly." That evening, after the men had eaten their fill and moved to the yard for music and storytelling around the bonfire, Yates stood and called for attention. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. Josephine, standing nearby with Emily in her arms, felt a flutter of nerves as all eyes turned toward them. Mrs. Calloway has done me the great honor of agreeing to become my wife, Yates continued, moving to stand beside her. We'll be married this Christmas, and I'd consider it a privilege if all of you would join us in celebrating. A moment of surprised silence was followed by a chorus of congratulations. Luke, the weathered foreman who rarely showed emotion, was the first to approach, extending his hand to Yates. "About time you found yourself a good woman," he said gruffly, before tipping his hat to Josephine. "Madam, if he ever gives you any trouble, you just let me know. I taught him how to ride, and I reckon I can still take him down a peg if needed." Josephine laughed. "I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Daniels." The other ranch hands followed with their own good wishes, some shy, others boisterous. One of the younger cowboys even offered to play a special song on his fiddle, a sweet melody that had Yates drawing Josephine into an impromptu dance while Mrs. Abernathy held Emily, under the starlit October sky, with the man she loved holding her close and her daughter safe nearby. Josephine felt a sense of belonging she had thought lost forever. The path that had led her to this moment had been fraught with hardship and sorrow, but now, surrounded by these good people who had become her family, she understood that sometimes the darkest moments could lead to the brightest futures. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a whirlwind of preparations. News of the engagement spread throughout the county, bringing a stream of visitors to the ranch, some genuinely offering congratulations, others barely disguising their curiosity about the widow who had captured Yates Rutherford's heart. Victoria Hargrove was not among the visitors, but her father came, bringing a surprisingly generous wedding gift of fine linens and a polite note from his daughter wishing them well. Josephine suspected the note had been written at her father's insistence, but she appreciated the gesture nonetheless. Mrs. Abernathy proved true to her word, creating a wedding dress that brought tears to Josephine's eyes when she first saw it. The older woman had ordered ivory silk from Denver and fashioned it into a gown of simple elegance, with lace at the collar and cuffs that she revealed had been from her sister's Yates's stepmother's wedding dress. "She would have wanted you to have it, Mrs. Abernathy said gruffly, blinking back tears of her own. "She'd have loved you like a daughter." "Thank you," Josephine whispered, embracing the woman who had become so dear to her, "for everything." Meanwhile, Emily was growing and changing daily, now 7 months old and attempting to crawl, much to everyone's delight. Yates, in particular, seemed endlessly fascinated by her development, often sitting on the floor to encourage her efforts, his face alight with genuine joy at each small accomplishment. One evening, as Josephine entered the parlor after putting away the dinner dishes, she paused in the doorway, her heart swelling at the sight before her. Yates sat cross-legged on the floor, Emily balanced against his knee as he read to her from a book of children's stories. The baby was clearly captivated, not by the words but by his animated expressions and the rumble of his voice. And the little bear said, "This porridge is just right," he read, adopting a comically gruff voice that made Emily gurgle with delight. Josephine leaned against the doorframe, loath to interrupt this precious moment. Yates must have sensed her presence, however, for he looked up with a warm smile. "Your daughter has excellent literary taste," he informed her. "She particularly appreciates my bare voice." "I can see that," Josephine replied, moving to join them on the floor, "though I suspect she's more enchanted with the reader than the story." Yates shifted Emily to sit between them. "Smart girl, then, like her mother." He reached across to take Josephine's hand. "I was thinking if you're agreeable that after we're married, I might legally adopt Emily." His expression grew serious. "I already love her as if she were my own, but I want her to have my name, to never doubt her place in this family." Tears pricked Josephine's eyes. "You would do that?" "I want to," he assured her. "She deserves a father who will protect her, provide for her, teach her to ride and read and do whatever else her heart desires." He squeezed Josephine's hand. "And you deserve a partner who loves all of you, including the remarkable daughter you've brought into the world." In that moment, Josephine knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just security but a love deeper and truer than she had ever imagined possible. This good, kind man who had first offered her a place at his table when she was desperate and alone now offered her and Emily a place in his heart and his future. Yes, she said simply. Emily deserves you as a father, and I can think of no greater gift for her. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with fresh snow blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside the house, which had been decorated with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and candles, an atmosphere of joyful anticipation prevailed as guests began to arrive. Judge Thompson had come from town to perform the ceremony, and the parlor had been arranged to accommodate the small gathering. Luke Daniels, looking uncomfortable but proud in his best suit, would stand as Yates's best man, while Mrs. Abernathy would attend Josephine. In the bedroom that would soon be theirs together, Josephine stood before the mirror as Mrs. Abernathy fastened the last buttons on her gown and arranged the simple veil over her upswept hair. "There," the housekeeper said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "You look like an angel." Josephine smoothed the silk skirt, her hands trembling slightly with nerves. "I can hardly believe this is happening," she admitted. "Sometimes I wake up thinking I'll find myself back on that street in Oro Grande, hungry and hopeless." Mrs. Abernathy squeezed her shoulder. "But you're not. You're here, about to marry a good man who adores you and that baby." She turned Josephine to face her. "Life has its share of hardships, child. The secret is to cherish the joys when they come, and you've found yourself a joy worth cherishing." A knock at the door interrupted them. Luke's gruff voice called through the wood, "Mrs. Abernathy, Miss Emily's fussing something fierce. Think she wants her mama before the ceremony starts." Josephine opened the door to find the foreman holding Emily awkwardly in his arms. The baby was dressed in a tiny white dress with a red sash, her wispy hair adorned with a small red bow. "Sorry, madam," Luke said, looking relieved as Emily immediately reached for Josephine. "She was fine with me until she spotted that fancy dress. Reckon she knows something important's happening." "It's all right," Josephine assured him, taking Emily and pressing a kiss to her warm cheek. "Thank you for watching her." Luke nodded, his weathered face softening as he looked at them both. "You know, I've known Yates since he was just a boy. Watched him grow into a man his father would be proud of. Never seen him as happy as he's been these past months with you and the little one." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "What I mean to say is, you're good for him, madam. Real good." "Thank you, Luke," Josephine replied, touched by the taciturn foreman's words. "That means a great deal coming from you." After he departed, Mrs. Abernathy helped adjust Josephine's veil around Emily, who was now content to be held by her mother. "There," she declared. "Nothing says you can't carry your daughter down the aisle. Might not be traditional, but then, nothing about you two has been." When the soft strains of a fiddle announced it was time, Josephine took a deep breath and descended the stairs. The small gathering rose as she entered the parlor, but her eyes sought only Yates, standing tall beside the judge before the fireplace. The love and wonder in his gaze as he watched her approach with Emily in her arms made her heart swell. This, she thought, was what it meant to come home, not to a place, but to a person who saw all of you and loved what they saw. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged simple vows and rings, his, a plain gold band. Hers, a delicate circlet set with a small sapphire that had belonged to his mother. When Judge Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, and then pressed a gentle kiss to Emily's forehead as well. "My family," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Both of you." The celebration that followed was warm and joyous, a Christmas feast prepared under Mrs. Abernathy's direction. Music from the Cowboy's fiddles and guitars, and even dancing when the furniture was pushed back against the walls. Snow began to fall again as evening approached, adding to the magical quality of the day. As the guests began to depart, bundling up against the cold, Josephine found herself standing on the porch with Yates, his arm around her waist as they bid farewell to the last visitors. Emily had long since been put to bed, exhausted from the excitement. "Happy, Mrs. Rutherford?" Yates asked softly once they were alone. Her new name sent a thrill through her. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. He turned her gently to face him, his hands warm against the chill air. "Do you remember that first night, when I found you in town?" "Of course," Josephine said. You said I would eat at your table that night. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in months. Yates smiled, brushing a snowflake from her cheek. I told myself I was just being decent, that anyone would have helped a woman and child in need. But the truth is, something changed for me the moment I saw you standing there, so brave despite everything. He drew her closer. I didn't know then that I was bringing home the woman who would become my wife, the mother of my children, Josephine repeated, her eyebrows rising. Presumptuous of you, Mr. Rutherford. His laugh was low and warm. Hopeful, he corrected. I'd like Emily to have brothers and sisters one day, if you're willing. The thought sent a pleasant warmth through her. I'd like that too, she admitted. A house full of children growing up here, learning to ride and tend the land, she paused, suddenly overwhelmed by the future spreading before them. It's more than I dared to dream when I arrived here. Dreams change, Yates said softly, sometimes for the better. He leaned down to kiss her again, unhurried now that they had a lifetime ahead. Come inside, wife. It's cold and tomorrow will be here soon enough. Hand in hand, they returned to the warmth of their home, to the life they would build together, a life born from a simple act of kindness on a desperate day, when a hungry woman with a baby found not just food at a stranger's table, but a love that would sustain them both for all the days to come. 2 years later, Josephine stood on the porch of the Rutherford ranch, watching as Yates led a tiny pony around the yard, Emily perched on its back, her delighted laughter carrying on the summer breeze. At 3 years old, Emily was fearless and curious, with her mother's blue eyes and a smile that could melt the sternest heart. Legally adopted by Yates shortly after their marriage, she now had no memory of a time when he hadn't been her father, and the bond between them was a joy to witness. Not too fast, Josephine called, instinctively protective despite knowing that Yates would never let Emily come to harm. She's fine, he called back, grinning. Aren't you, princess? Tell your mama you're an expert rider already. Expert. Emily echoed happily, bouncing slightly in the small saddle Yates had commissioned especially for her. Josephine shook her head, smiling as she placed a protective hand over her swollen belly. 7 months pregnant with their second child, she felt a contentment that sometimes still seemed miraculous given the circumstances of her arrival in Oro Grande. The past 2 years had brought changes to the ranch and the town. The railroad had finally reached Oro Grande, bringing new settlers and prosperity. Yates had expanded their cattle operation, hiring more hands and purchasing additional land to the north. The house itself had grown too, with a new wing added to accommodate their growing family and Mrs. Abernathy, who now proudly occupied a suite of rooms befitting her status as surrogate grandmother to Emily and trusted advisor to both Josephine and Yates. Victoria Hargrove had indeed married Mr. Ellis from Denver and moved east, much to everyone's relief. Harold Hargrove, surprisingly, had become one of Yates's most reliable business partners, investing in a shared venture to improve the local stockyards. As Josephine watched her husband and daughter, she felt the baby within her shift and kick. According to Mrs. Abernathy, who claimed to have an infallible sense about these things, this child would be a boy. Yates insisted he didn't care either way, as long as mother and baby were healthy, but Josephine had caught him referring to my son when he thought she wasn't listening. Luke appeared from the direction of the barn, leading a newly broken colt. The foreman had remained a steadfast presence, becoming something of an uncle to Emily and a trusted friend to both Josephine and Yates. Mrs. Rutherford, he greeted, tipping his hat. Fine day for riding lessons. It is, she agreed, though I think her father is more excited than she is. Luke chuckled, watching as Yates let Emily hold the reins herself for a moment, his hands hovering nearby. He's a natural father, the foreman observed. Always knew he would be, once he found the right woman to start a family with. Josephine smiled, warmed by the simple truth of it. Yates had indeed found his calling as a husband and father, approaching both roles with the same dedication and integrity he brought to everything. Mama. Emily called, waving frantically. Look, I'm doing it. I see you, sweetheart, Josephine called back. You're doing wonderfully. Later that evening, after Emily had been put to bed with 3 bedtime stories and countless kisses, Josephine sat on the porch swing, enjoying the cool night air. Yates joined her, handing her a cup of tea before settling beside her, his arm automatically going around her shoulders. "Emily's already asking when she can ride again tomorrow," he said, amusement coloring his voice. "I'm not surprised," Josephine replied, leaning into his warmth. "She's fearless, just like her father, and determined like her mother." Yates placed his free hand on her belly, smiling when he felt the baby kick. "This one's active tonight. He's been practicing his riding skills all day," Josephine said dryly, "or perhaps boxing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Josephine found herself thinking, as she often did in quiet moments, of the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the struggle, and finally, the unexpected joy. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked softly. "When we first met," Yates's arm tightened slightly around her. "Often. I remember how tired you looked, how thin but so determined, standing there with Emily, refusing to give up despite everything." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I think I started falling in love with you right then, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I was so desperate," Josephine admitted. "When you offered me a place at your table, it seemed like a miracle." She turned to look at him, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I never imagined that simple kindness would lead to all this: a home, a family, a life I love." "The best decisions often start with simple kindness," Yates replied. "Though I can't take all the credit, you're the one who was brave enough to trust a stranger to build a new life from nothing." He covered her hand with his own. "You're the strongest person I know, Josephine Rutherford." The baby kicked again, as if in agreement, making them both laugh. "What shall we name him?" Josephine asked, allowing herself to accept Mrs. Abernathy's certainty about the baby's gender. "If it is a boy." Yates considered for a moment. "What about Thomas?" he suggested gently, "to honor his memory." Touched by the gesture, Josephine nodded. "Thomas Yates Rutherford," she said, testing the name. "It's perfect. And if Mrs. Abernathy is wrong and we have another daughter?" "Sarah," Josephine replied without hesitation. "After your mother." Yates smiled, clearly pleased. "She would have liked that." He reached into his pocket. "I have something for you, an early birthday present." He handed her a small box, which she opened to find a delicate gold locket. Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of Emily on one side, with space left empty on the other. "For the new baby," Yates explained. "So you can keep them both close to your heart, even when they're grown and too busy for their mother." Tears sprang to Josephine's eyes as she closed the locket and let Yates fasten it around her neck. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." He kissed her then, a kiss full of tenderness and promise. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he said softly. "For Emily, for our child to come, for making this house a home. For everything." Inside, the clock chimed 9, reminding them that morning would come early, bringing with it the countless tasks that ranch life demanded. But for now, in this peaceful moment as twilight deepened around them, Josephine allowed herself to simply be grateful for the unexpected path that had led her to this man, this home, this life. From desperation on a dusty street to contentment on a porch swing beside the man she loved, it was a journey she could never have imagined when she arrived in Oro Grande with a hungry baby and no hope for tomorrow. But as Yates had once told her, sometimes the darkest moments led to the brightest futures. And here, safe in his arms with their children, one sleeping peacefully upstairs, one nestled beneath her heart, Josephine knew that her future had never been brighter. As they rose to go inside, Yates paused, drawing her close once more. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "one day we'll tell our children and grandchildren the story of how we met, how a simple invitation to dinner changed everything." Josephine smiled up at him, her heart full. "And we'll tell them that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the simplest acts of kindness." Hand in hand, they walked into their home, closing the door on the vast Colorado night, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, the family that had found each other against all odds in the wild, beautiful lands of the West.